Welcome to our lecture. Thank you for joining us. Today is Tuesday, October 22nd, 25th. Yeah, time flies when you're having fun moving house. Tuesday, October 25th, 2022. I'm Steve Shields, President of Royal Asiatic Society of Korea. I want to take this opportunity to express our thanks, sincere gratitude to our generous patron, the Asia Development Foundation, for their continued support. We also appreciate our other many donors, big and small. Your support is wholeheartedly welcome and greatly needed. You are cordially reminded that lecture content does not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of the Royal Asiatic Society of Korea. We are joined tonight by Dr. Paul Courtright, a former Peace Corps member and an eyewitness to the events in Gwangju as they unfolded in May 1980. He will be sharing at long last. Book's been out for a couple of years, been trying to get to Korea. COVID was making it difficult. So he's going to talk about his personal reflections and some of the reactions to his book, Witnessing Gwangju, which we have a few copies available for sale. And if you already have a copy, buy another one. Get this one inscribed and we give the other one away as a gift at the holiday time. You know, that'd be a really good thing to do. 18,001. And you can see Joanne after the lecture and get the book. It's just for the photos alone. I think it's worth the price. It's not a happy book. You know, so you're not having a happy time, but it's an important era of Korea's history. After the lecture, of course, we'll have some time for questions and answers. And so now please welcome Paul Courtright.
Thank you very much. Let me grab my notes behind you. Sorry, I should have had that ready.
Okay.
No, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here. Of course, I should have been here 2.5 years ago. That didn't quite work out, but you know, so be it. You know, so we're here now. So, as you mentioned, what I'm going to be talking about is from my book, and really just talking about some of the reflections and opinions and reactions I've had. Thank you. To the publication. So I'm going to kind of break it into 3 pieces. First piece, kind of when I was writing, and because I came back to Korea in 2019 to make sure that I had certain aspects of the narrative right and the setting right. And then, of course, at publication, then finally, now we're looking at 2.5 years later. So, you know, I'm not going to repeat stuff from before, but I do think it's probably important to know kind of where I came into this picture. So I came to Korea in early 1979 as a Peace Corps volunteer. And at that time, you know, it was 2 years service. And I was a young 24-year-old at the time, which makes me feel a lot older now. And after training, I was placed in Naju. And in Naju, I was to be the leprosy worker, to be working with a Korean leprosy worker in that program. I spent about 6 months in Naju, but I realized because my county had 2 leprosy villages, one right next to Gwangju, which had probably about 300 patients, and a really small one quite a ways away. I could not manage both. So I moved to the larger village that's right near Nampyeong. And so I lived in the village from that time forward. So I don't know if you're familiar with Gwangju and its environs. So as you come south of Gwangju, if you're heading towards Mokpo, of course the roads have changed now, but at that time you would go through this little tiny town of Nampyeong, and after Nampyeong is Naju, and then on to Mokpo. So I live right next to the town of Nampyeong. That's where my village was. So on May 18, of course, the day that the whole uprising started, I was not in Gwangju. I was actually hiking in the hills next to Gwangju. So I had absolutely no idea what had happened in Gwangju that day until I came back out and back to my village. And my village leader said, you know, something horrible is happening in Gwangju. And I was to take patients the next day to Suncheon obviously through Gwangju to the Yosu Aeon Chebab Jangwon, because they needed surgery for their eye disease. So he said, "Are you going to take them?" He said, "We don't know what's going on." I said, "Yes, I'm going to take them anyway. It took us a long time to get that arranged." So that day, the 19th, that I took them and came back into Gwangju was kind of the start of my time in Gwangju. So I was not there on the 18th. And if you think of the whole incident of the Gwangju uprising, I saw one piece of it. You know, you have to remember there's probably thousands of stories that could be told because everybody has a different part that they witnessed. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So in writing the book, I realized that you know, I needed to tell it more from the perspective of my experience rather than from the perspective of being an academic. Because I'm not an academic, well, not in this area at least, not an academic to know all of the intricacies. So I felt it was important to write it as a memoir from my experiences. And then the publishers were very keen to get it published in Korean. So they're the ones that then took the responsibility of getting it translated and everything. So the pictures in the book are from Robin Moyer, and Robin Moyer was a Time photographer, and it so happened that he came in town with Terry Anderson and a few more reporters, and because they didn't speak Korean, so we ended up, there were 3 of us volunteers, ended up translating. And Robin and I kind of got assigned to Robin, so a lot of the pictures I was with him going around town taking pictures. So these pictures and these pictures and a lot of those, of course, are in the book. Go ahead and go on to the next one. I'll be quite, well, as you might imagine, being a witness to the uprising was a really painful experience for me. And this is a picture I took, you know, going into Gwangju just after the military had created a ring around. And just after this scene, there were a number of buses that had been carrying students back and forth the previous day, and they were now turned over full of bullet holes. And it was to witness and see all of that was really disturbing. What it meant was that I found it really difficult to sit and write it down in terms of writing a book. I knew I wanted to write a book, but at that time I was not in a position to do it. So I'd always planned to do it. My career after I came back to the US and doing my Masters and Doctorate has frankly been in Africa. I spent 20 years working in different countries in Eastern Africa, and Gwangju was out there. And I basically set it aside saying, you know, I just can't face it now. And so I got on with career and all that. So for those of you who have written a book, you will know that writing is a journey. It's not just you sit down, do it, and it's done. It is a major journey. And that's the way it was for me. So that's why I'm going to focus a bit on that journey, because I think I learned a lot more by writing it than I would have ever guessed at the time. But like I said, I'm going to break it into 3 parts, and I'm going to first talk about the time when I was writing the book. And as I said, the first time that I decided to write it down for publication, my goal was really to address an American audience. That's who I felt was my audience for this book. I felt that because, you know, there was absolutely no understanding of this episode. In America, there's no understanding of America's role. There's no understanding of this episode and its, how it helped transform Korea and democracy. That was completely unknown. So that was my major reason for writing it. But as I said, I recognized that my story was a small one, but also what I learned pretty quickly is there was no other memoir by a foreigner out there. which surprised me. So there were a few foreigners, there were a few missionaries and whatnot in Gwangju, but nobody else had actually written a memoir. There have been some academic pieces, but not actually a memoir. So that's kind of stimulated me to get it done. So what I decided to do in 2019 is to come back to Korea and spend some time in Gwangju and back in my village, really to make sure that I had captured all of the setting well. Because to be honest, I couldn't remember, you know, the dochang, the Jeonnam dochang, did it have 3 stories? Was it 4 stories? I felt I needed to walk through everything. I needed to walk everywhere where I had been before. And you know, within a few days, in fact, within 2 days of arriving in Korea, in Seoul, a couple of my Korean friends came up to me and said, you know, you really need to have this book, not just for an American audience, you need to have it for a Korean audience as well, which my first thought was, well, why would a Korean audience want to hear what I would want to say? Because, you know, I can only give a perspective from a foreigner. I'm not a Korean. But they said that was important because they're, you know, as a foreigner, I'm viewed as being independent. I'm not coming into it with a bias from this side or a bias from that side. So, you know, that kind of led me to say, okay, then we'll deal with a Korean publisher. And thanks to Suzanne Crowder-Hahn, who you all know, she introduced me to Holland, and that is how we move forward. But before mentioning what I learned in my experiences with Koreans at that time, I want to mention that here in Seoul, when I went out in the streets in Gwanghwamun, frankly, I was shocked. I was shocked at what I would call the disinformation that I still saw regarding Oilpal on the streets. So back in 2019, there were people who were putting up posters. I think this next one may be one. So, you know, stuff like this was up on the streets in Seoul, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that that whole narrative from 1980 was still being held alive. And really, it shocked me to realize that was still the narrative believed by a lot of people. So it was kind of, for me, another indication why we needed to probably, you know, put it into Korean as well. So in terms of back in 2019, one of the comments one of the first comments I had for people was, why did it take you so long to do this? And I think there are 2 parts to that. One part was, you know, gosh, guy, you're really slow. But the other one was, you know, how can you actually describe something that happened so long ago? And that's a very fair question. And the only way that I could have written this book is because every day during those days in Gwangju, I wrote everything down every night. I didn't do it with a plan of writing a book one day. I wrote it down because it helped me get to sleep at night. You know, because writing it down and saying, okay, it's there, you know, okay, I don't have to, my mind doesn't have to just churn through night after night. So that was really important for my mental health. And if I didn't have those notes, it would have been impossible to write the book. So understand that when I use dialogue in the book, I'm recreating. So again, I didn't have a tape recorder then. Okay, tell me exactly what you said. No, I had to just try to recreate the dialogue as best I can. So just understand that's memoirs, you have that challenge of recollection. So that was the first thing I heard. The second one, which I found very interesting, and even the publisher said this, it was really that they're so sorry that I had to see this very difficult time in Korean history. And I realized that's so very Korean. People don't want you to witness, or not witness, but to see things that are uncomfortable. They want you to love Korea, which I love Korea, but they don't want people to you know, have to have pain, you know, as a foreigner. So I got a lot of that, and I felt like saying, no, don't feel sorry for me. You know, you could have felt sorry for me back then, but I'm over, I'm fine now, I've moved on. But that was a very common response that I was getting back then. And then the last comment was, because everybody's seeing the taxi driver, says, oh, so they only thought that Jürgen Hinzpeter was the only foreigner in Gwangju. So next picture, next slide. So that's Jürgen Hinzpeter in the picture, and this is me here. So, and I think Dave Dollinger, who also wrote a book. So the taxi driver is a nice story, but stretches the truth a bit. Anyway, so that picture kind of keeps coming up time and time again, so that people recognize, well, there were a few foreigners in town, and they were capturing things. It's just a lot of it never really got out well. So those are kind of the impressions I got as I was writing. So time of publication, the key thing was, let's have this book ready by May 18, 2020. I bought our tickets in late 2019. We had all kinds of book tour stuff started with Holland Press, the Oil Pal Foundation in Gwangju, and of course, our lovely COVID hit. So everything just ground to a halt. So honestly, there probably was no worse time to publish than in 2020. So I really chose that. I chose it. Anyway, so in 2020 though, I ended up doing lots of radio and TV and various stuff. And here were some of the common comments and questions that I got at that time. Again, I found them very interesting. So the first one was, what do you want to say to Chandu Huan? And of course, what I wanted to say to Chandu Huan, I kind of did not say, because I don't think it was appropriate for me as a foreigner to do that. It's Korean. But that was a common question of me, is what I want to say to Chandu Huan. And of course, now that he's dead, I can say, okay, you're dead. Good. Okay. But at that time, I basically just kept my mouth shut. Okay, he's old, he's gonna die. That's fine. Then the second one that often came up is, what is it that young people need to know about oil palm? And this is actually something that when I was in Gwangju about 2 weeks ago, so I've been here for a few weeks and traveling around. And this question actually is coming up more and more. So it wasn't just that, it keeps reoccurring. And that is that there's a sense by young people, this was stated in Gwangju, that they only know about the violence and the tragedy of oil palm. That there's not a good understanding of the role of that whole episode that has moved Korea forward. So there's not what I would call a pride in the outcome. So it's all focused on, the struggles, the violence and all of that. And that's all very real. But if everything is focused on that, then we don't learn from it. But we need to learn what we can do differently. And so to me, this is kind of where I focus, is to say, young people should look at this whole episode and say, how did people come together? How did they really work together? How did they face, this difficult situation? And yes, the military did reinvade, but how did they then move forward? So that's kind of how I tend to address that one, because it's unfortunate if it's all focused on the violence, because that's, everybody's always asking the numbers. We want the exact numbers. That's a waste of time. Okay, that's my opinion. Let's let that go. That's not, really what the most important thing is. And then the third one, and that was, of course, because that was when Myanmar, the military junta had just taken over. And again, that's not a question I expected. I've actually worked in Myanmar as part of my career, and I felt, of course, Myanmar is a lovely country, and I feel, and I actually asked this question of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who we had lunch with today. I said, not why doesn't, but can Korea take a more active role in trying to help mediate and help resolve the problems in Myanmar because of the experience of this, but also because Korea is not viewed like the US or Russia or China. Korea doesn't come into this, with a lot of baggage. If the Americans are talking to them, well, this is some kind of, struggle, struggle between this anti-China, whatever. Korea comes into it very independent. And that's how I respond. I would love to see Korea take an active role because of the experience in saying, how can we help resolve that? So, but again, a very interesting question, one I had not anticipated, but it came up. So that was kind of at the time of publication. I will be honest, since I could not be in Korea at that time, I couldn't be on the street. I don't know what the man on the street thought of the book. That said, I have never had any serious pushback by anybody, which I thought I might, but I have not had any serious pushback by anybody. What I found interesting from the various media work, where they were reviewing it on video, was how what particular sections of the book that resonated with them. So next slide. So this, I don't know what this particular program is, but it's like a, I don't know what you would call it, where two people that come up and talk about the things of the day and whatever. It's like an hour long. Anyways, this gentleman on the left, he started talking about my book, and he started relating. If you've read the book, you'll remember at the very prologue, I talk about the fact that I'm coming down out of the post office in Gwangju, and as I'm coming down, a halmoni grabs me on the street, and my impression is, oh, she wants me to help her across the street, and no, she said, we have no voice. You have to be our voice. We have no voice. We cannot tell the world what's happening. You have to be our voice. And so when that gentleman started talking to me, he started crying, and it's like, I didn't realize it would have such an impact, on some people. And it clearly has. On some people, there are sections of it that resonated with them. So that's good. I mean, if that can resonate, I feel pleased with it. Next one. The other one that really was interesting to me is the gentleman who translated the book, Cheongju. He really but a piece that resonated with him was in the little tiny village of Nampyeong. So Nampyeong is a farming village, it has there's no university, it has a small little primary school, but that's it. It's a farming village. And yet here in this farming village outside of Gwangju, there are halmonis dancing in the streets when the buses were coming through full of students. And what happened also, and I relate this in the book, the people raided the armory in that little town. So, the police station had its armory. They raided it and started handing out weapons to everybody. And you might think, oh my God, total anarchy. But of course, no, it was very well organized and whatnot. But then what happened is one of the students off the buses said, no, you have to put them back, because if you keep them, if you have them, the military will kill you. And so people started handing them back to put in. But then a halbuji stopped everybody and said, no, we must destroy them. We must. So they just created this massive pile, destroyed all those rifles in the street. And I think the reason it resonated with him was that we talk about, Owilpal, and most people think Gwangju. Yes, Gwangju is where most of it happened, but there was a lot that happened outside of Gwangju. And that's just one little story. My fear is that a lot of those little stories have not been captured. So it was not just the Gwangju event. The other person, Kim Man-jin, who is an NBC documentarian, he did a hour-long documentary, and he came to America and interviewed me during that time. And the piece that resonated with him was a section where I'm talking to a guy in the, they had that temporary mortuary, and it was a medical student who was kind of taking charge of all the coffins were open, people had not been identified yet. And I was with a photographer, and there was a Halimoni, and right next to her, a very young boy, probably about 6 or 7. And of course, most people were young people, younger, like students. And so, asking, well, how were they killed? And he said, well, they were killed, shot by people from a helicopter overhead. And if you might remember, Chen Duhuan always said, no, that never happened, that never happened. And so for him, having it, written down, and he actually wanted my actual notes, the things I'd actually written down where the word helicopter is in there. Because I think that part of the story of the whole episode has gotten distorted so much that some piece of it, have been jettisoned unnecessarily. And so that resonated with him. So let's move on. So 2 years later, as you can, this was actually last year. I have probably sold 10 times as many books in Korea as in America. Okay, that was totally unexpected by me. I don't know if that was expected by anybody else, but I'm happy with whatever happens. I'm not going to argue one way or the other. But I want to give you some of the reactions I've had. The first reaction, and this is more recently, I met with a Korean consular official who's based in the US. And there's a function, at the consulate for former Peace Corps volunteers. And I gave him a copy of my book, both the Korean and the English. And then a couple weeks later, he contacted me and said he wanted to meet with me. And so, I'm in San Diego, so I had to figure out how to get together with him. But anyways, his question to me said, you say in there that the soldiers who were responsible for the killing were from the Gyeongsandos, Jeonnam in particular. He said, how do you know that? How can you, because he said the rest of the book you report it as is, but how do you know that? Did you talk with them? And of course I said, well, no, I really did not talk with them. Well, hi, how you guys doing today? Having a nice cheery day here? No, I did not talk with them. And the times that I had to deal with them trying to get out and they would not let me out, I cannot, I know the Jeonnam Satari, but I certainly don't know the Gyeongsando Satari. I could not, if they would say anything, I would not know if they're from the Gyeongsandos or not. So I said, I have to go on what everybody around me said. Everybody on the street, that's what they said. But I think, and I learned later, he said he's from the Gyeongsandos. But I think this to me was an indication that there's always a lot of personal interactions that people have that always, some things, bother them, or some things always kind of hit them. So with him, this was a particular piece of it that he was uncomfortable with. But that's the most pushback I've ever had on it. Next slide, let's see here. Yeah, so the next, oh, I'm sorry, that's the one, because I want to use that one for the consular official. Sorry, next slide. So the next thing to ask you, does anybody know what this is? Sorry? You got it. So when I talk in America to groups, not university groups, because university groups know, but when I talk to groups that have no knowledge of this or much about Korea, I put this slide up and I ask everybody, I say, how many of you know exactly where you were when Mount St. Helens blew? And I would say 90% of the people in the audience, they know, because it was such a dramatic event in the US that everybody knows where they were. And I say, that's why you don't know about Gwangju. It's because this event just blasted Gwangju off the front pages. It was the exact same day. So, it's understandable why people don't know about it. There were reports and there were news items, but they went way down the bottom of the page. This dominated news. So this is really one of the things we're up against is they don't know because of this particular event. Go on the next slide. Actually, a little early for that one. Anyways, the other question I often get when it's university audiences is what is the US's role and responsibility? And it's a fair question. And honestly, it's a question I have to say I am disappointed with the US response, but I think it's complicated. I don't think we really understand everything that was going on. I read Ambassador Gleistein's book and his take on it. I don't necessarily agree with him. I think they made some huge errors. I only learned when I read that book that there was, a Korean speaking, embassy employee. They didn't send that person down to Gwangju. I mean, I'm just like, why would you not do that? Anyway, so, this whole business of American involvement, responsibility, I don't think has been adequately addressed yet. I'm hoping somebody's looking at it, but that's often a question that I get. And I just have to fob it off to somebody else because I don't really know what kind of the full response was. So this picture relates, I'm going to go back a bit in a story. In May of this year, the Korean American community in Los Angeles asked me to come up for a May 18, they're doing talks. And so they wanted me to come up and give a talk. So I said, fine. And they said, please bring up any copies of your book you have with you, both the English and the Korean. So whatever I had, I had 20 and they bought all of them. So whoopee, 20 sales. So, so they took them all. And I was quite surprised. And some of them, they said, please write to Representative so-and-so in the front of the book. And I was like, oh, it wasn't when I think of a representative, I think of, the congressional, but it was a state representative that they were giving the books to. And I was curious. So, I thought nothing of it. Okay, fine. And then in July, they contacted me again. They said, can you come up to Sacramento in August for a ceremony to recognize that California Assembly is adopting a resolution, HR 120, recognizing May 18 from this time forward as the day of democratization in California based upon OILPA. So, so that was a surprise. So I go up and of course I'm the only non-Korean in the audience, but one of the individuals who drafted the resolution came up to me later, and this is a guy his name is Ken Cooley. He came up to me later and said, I want you to know that your book, because he said he got my book, he said, I made sure that everybody on the committee got your book and that it's been, provided to everybody in the assembly. Your book is what made this pass unanimously. So, it was quite, feeling, because kind of thinking back to the grandmother, she wanted me to tell the world, okay, it took me 40 years, but anyways, it's out there. So, I hope she can rest in peace. But anyways, it was quite amazing to realize that after all this time that it still has some resonance. And so in California, from now on, May 18 will be recognized as the day of democracy. So that was cool. Next slide. I think it's my last slide. So I just want to kind of summarize by saying, I'm still learning, of course. One of the things that I think I'm always going to have to struggle with is, Chun's false narrative from way back then. And my guess is that it's going to be a generational change. It's only going to be, when the generation, say our generation, my generation gets old enough and dies off, will we see that narrative die off? Because I think it's kind of was baked into people's brains, back then in the 1980s. The other thing that and I push this probably more than I should, is that I think it's critical that we capture stories from throughout Jeonnam Province, not just in Gwangju. Because I think, realizing that there are farmers and shopkeepers out there, protesting and supporting, the movement is incredible to realize, in that society. And the other thing that always impresses me is in Gwangju itself, we walked up Kumnamno, and in front of the Dochan, they had set up all these tables, and the names of the universities, Jeonnamdae and all the other ones were there, and people were lined up volunteering. They were volunteering to drive people around. They were volunteering to man the perimeter. They were volunteering to cook. I mean, this sense of we're in this together. We have to approach this together. I was really, really impressed by it. I mean, very impressive. And then finally, this business I mentioned earlier is I really think that we need to shift a lot of that discussion from the issue of the violence. Yes, it's there, but to really focus on how it helped promote democracy, not just obviously in Gwangju or Jeonnam, but throughout Korea. And to see it now recognized in California is only, to me, a little icing on the cake. So, and with that, I'm going to stop and answer the questions.
Paul, thank you very much. I'm going to let you field your own questions. I'll ask Matt if there's somebody on the Zoom, just kind of edge in and recognize them when there's an opportunity. So, Ambassador Kim, I think you can start the
Translated
question.
the book into Korean.
Chae Yong-ju, and he is also involved with the 518 Commission. So, and actually he was one who initially also had said, okay, you got to do it in Korean. So it was the publishers who then worked with him on that. And then I had a friend of mine, well, actually, Suzanne Crowder-Han. So Yoon-suk is then checked all the Korean for me after he had translated it. So we had to make some editing after that.
How true do you think is the allegation that General Chen Dong-an flew from Yongsan base to Gwangju?
I don't know. I can't say how true it is one way or the other. I don't know. So I've heard both, both perspectives, but I would have to say I don't know. I was on the ground, so if he was flying overhead, he did not make himself known. So I don't know.
The starting point is Yongsan base. That's the most important point in relation to the allegation of some American involvement.
Yeah. So, Ambassador Kim, just to be clear, you're saying Yongsan USFK headquarters base in Seoul.
Yeah. Okay. Go, Don.
Okay, well, yeah, you talked about the murkiness of the American involvement. And one thing is, then they come out recently, not known by most people, I think it was the 23rd or the 24th of May, bombers at a joint U.S. RK base outside of Gwangju were on tarmac ready to take off and bomb the city. The Americans stopped them. That's been reported in the press as the bombers were stopped. It's never been reported in the press that the Americans stopped them, but I had that good authority. I knew it in 1980, but it's confirmed recently.
Yeah.
And so that people in Gwangju, if they knew that, they might be a little less anti-American.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard that, quite a few years later, and I thought, well, probably wouldn't have done well for me. But, yeah, that would not go down well in Gwangju, and obviously there was a lot of anti-American sentiment in Gwangju afterwards. But I'll also say that I think as Peace Corps volunteers, we were always treated extremely well. And I never felt any hostility or any sense of danger ever, So I think that we were very fortunate and people treated us extremely well.
You may remember people thought that the Navy ships that were leaving Okinawa instead of Korea, they thought they were coming to help the people of Gwangju.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, thank you for the good talk. I'm asking a question that's off the wall, but it's from a student really. She's trying to understand why Gwangju gets all the attention, taxi drivers things, and where Jeju doesn't.
Yeah, no, it's a good question.
And
Yeah.
I'm trying to. I think your last comment gave some clue to that, but I'd like to hear your opinion.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with just the span of time that has passed. The fact is that a lot of what we know about Jeju has only been recently kind of dug up and made available. I don't think we have as expansive a history and knowledge about what happened in Jeju all those years ago. So, and of course, would have Gwangju even happened in today's world if we had mobile phones or? No, so I just think it's the technology, even, the fact that the military closed off all the phone lines, every link was closed, but still, foreign reporters did get in.
Yeah.
And still, I did get out just before they came. So it was more porous, and there were more people who witnessed, I think, than in Jeju.
Yeah, I think your last comment about it leading to democracy, whereas change happened, people fled to Japan, and it's over.
Yeah.
Elections took place and change was formed in martial law.
Yeah.
So maybe the after
Effects, yeah.
There's a question here online from Jacko Wester saying, Dr. Courtright, Tim Shorrock has said for years that the U.S. was culpable for the events of 5/18. Are you familiar with his argument and are you convinced?
Am I familiar with his arguments? Yes. Am I convinced? Not exactly. So I think there's still a lot more we need to know. And I don't think it does us any good to jump to conclusions until we really have all the details. I do think that the US has a responsibility. And I do think that it would be important for the US to, shall we say, come clean and really understand it. I just don't think that we've had that level of kind of investigation yet. So that's I wouldn't want to jump to conclusions until we get a really much more thorough investigation.
What would have been the US's motivation to get involved? Was it for political stability or to support the Chanduan regime, or what? Why would they get involved?
Well, involved in what way? So I think that the question was, did the US permit, the sending of troops to Gwangju? So that's the first question that always comes up. And I don't think it's an issue of, the US didn't permit it, the Chun did it.
Yeah.
And, the US was not really aware of a lot of it. So this happened, but what should the US have done at that point in time? And I think the US was probably afraid, thinking of North Korea, this was an opportunity. So I think they let Chun Doo-hwan have, shall we say, a get out of jail free card by letting him do that. I think that obviously was a mistake. I don't think they could have stopped him sending the troops down after it happened, but you can then intervene, which I don't think the US did adequately. But that's my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the last comment raised the question of, has anybody looked at the archives and for this, there might be some secrets in,
Well, I had a message from the translator, Cheong-ju, that he went to the Carter Center in Atlanta to look through the archives of the Carter administration for that, during that particular period. Actually, I'm having dinner with him night after tomorrow, so maybe I will get some clues as to if there's much there.
Maryland would be the
Is that right?
place,
Okay.
if they have a folder on.
Yeah.
Gwangju.
And that I don't know, so, yeah.
I will say that the Carter Library stuff is all online now. It was shared about a year ago or something.
Okay.
There's the declaration of martial law was designed to bring Changchuan to power. And then the articulation between that decision and what happened in Gwangju, it's not really quite clear to me. To what extent Gwangju was planned in that context. The way it was told in Korea is often that it was all planned as part of the martial law thing. So what do you say?
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you mean. That was certainly not my understanding, you know, it was my understanding was more that, you know, the demonstrations were in Seoul. Okay, we all knew that those were going on. They'd quieted down. And then, you know, there were still some small demonstrations. But then the martial law was declared in order to take people out of the picture, you know, Kim Dae-jung and others. And then the response to that was the demos in Gwangju, which then the crackdown on those demos is what erupted everything. So that's you know, kind of how I saw things happen at the time. So
And how planned it was.
yeah, planned. I did not have any sense of whether it was. It didn't seem planned very well. If it was planned, it was not planned well. So
Not right.
yeah.